Stop moving will be something you will always regret. I promise, the dazzling ballroom echoed with my father's voice as he swung a crystal vase and glared with anger in his eyes. As the applause from the crowd erupted into gasps, my body froze in terror. I felt the warm blood dripping down my shoulder as it stained the floor of the most luxurious hotel in Portland. As if to denigrate the chaos below, the chandeliers glowed above like cruel stars. After being betrayed by members of my own family, I am now in a situation where cameras and sirens are closing in. Why am I in this place? That night, everything in my world came crashing down, and it was on that fateful night that I learned my true identity. Emily Harper, as a little girl growing up in the dreary suburbs of Portland, Oregon, I was the overlooked daughter in a perfectionist family. The joy that Grace, my younger sister, brought into our parents' lives shone through her infectious grins, which Margaret and Thomas valued highly. Is that so, as the reserved, quiet one I used to fantasize about, forests and like sketching plants? On my 10th birthday, I begged my parents to get me a microscope, my eyes wide with excitement. A cosmetics kit was instead given to me by the acerbic Margaret. Emily, you would do well to strive to be as beautiful as Grace. Thomas looked away from Grace's shiny new ballet shoes and disregarded me with a condescending nod. The effect that incident had on me was like a scar that would never fully heal. By the time I was 15 years old, I had won a scientific fair on a state level, and I nervously clung onto my diploma. A sigh of frustration escaped Hugh. This weekend is Grace's dance recital, and I know you're busy. We are very impressed by her. My achievements gathered dust on the mantel as Grace's trophies gleamed. A defiant flame murmured from within, speaking volumes. I was sufficient. Their love for me was proof of my worth that I didn't need. Quite simply, I needed time to myself. A quiet defiance against the crushing weight of my family's rejection. That fire has kept me going all these years. Here among the lush foliage of Portland's woods, a girl named Emily Harper sought solace while the Douglas firs whispered stories ancient than my grief. I discovered my place by stealthily paving my own way, but Grace was the star of the show at my childhood home in Beaverton. My curvy-haired mother, Margaret, was a perfectionist who couldn't get enough of Grace's sparkle. Thomas, my dad, was as distant as a thundercloud. The only time he showed emotion was during Grace's pageantry, when she would grin and twirl. To put it simply, I wanted to one day have a career doing research and protecting the environment. Not taken into consideration. Feels like I was only a little while ago that I was 12. In an effort to decipher the mysteries surrounding roots and leaves, I had spent weeks scouring a botany book found in a catalog. On the big day, I couldn't contain my excitement as I eagerly tore open my present, only to find a set of shiny hairbrushes. Margaret beamed. Emily, your wild hair can be styled in no time. Strive to be more like Grace. While Grace chuckled in her new velvet skirt, Thomas's unusual smile lit up the room, casting a warm glow on her. I forced myself to swallow the agony as I planted the mental image of the book like a seed in a pot, despite the fact that my throat tightened. At school, I was able to escape. I devoted myself fully to biology, memorizing the life cycles of plants and sketching ecosystems in my worn notebook while Grace wowed the dance class. At the age of 16, I joined a regional science competition, and I remember staying up late in our garage rigging a model of sustainable irrigation. As I emerged victorious, the judges' praise felt like a welcome change after all those dark years. After obtaining the certificate, I quickly made my way back home, eagerly anticipating their recognition. With a swift glance upward, Thomas caught a glimpse of Grace in her most recent pageant photos. "You were very successful." Grace was crowned Miss Junior Portland, as you might have heard. Margaret was completely oblivious. The light grew brighter even as my heart sank. It was unnecessary for them to examine it. Something I would make would engulf them. I managed to secure a full scholarship to attend the University of Oregon immediately after graduating from high school so I could escape the stifling atmosphere of Beaverton. My eyes were opened when I went to college. In classrooms and labs, my enthusiasm for ecology was encouraged, not mocked. My professors' praise for my efforts to protect forests made me feel heard for the first time. I saved up for a future I could call my own while working as a barista and going to night classes. Grace dropped by once, but her designer bag was out of place. With my dorm's retro chic furnishings, the air was filled with her laughter. "Why are you trying so hard?" Abhor existence. I tightly smiled because I knew she would never understand the hunger that engulfed me. I graduated first in my class at the age of 24, and the Pacific Northwest Research Institute in Portland hired me. My wage wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to let me dream of a location where I might put down permanent roots, a house. I was the kind of person who put her bonus money away and passed up pricey concerts and vacations. At 30 years of age, after years of saving and making sacrifices, I finally purchased a home in the tranquil Laurelhurst neighborhood for $500,000. Downtown, you could see maple trees lining the streets. There was a cozy study for my books, lots of windows in the kitchen, and a backyard I could envision filled with native plants, all the right amenities in this house. Standing in the living room with the keys in my hands, I felt an overwhelming sense of achievement. I built this whole thing by myself. My goal in contacting Margaret to deliver the news was to elicit a reaction of some type. She spoke in a robotic manner. "This is very beautiful, Emily. Downtown. Why were you so naughty?" "A lot of people are discussing Grace's new modeling contract." Thomas mumbled something quietly to himself. "Such a huge house for a single person. It looks effortless." I chose to disregard their hurtful remarks. My home was not a place for anyone. It was my responsibility to emerge from my relative obscurity and stand boldly. All the while, Grace's life was a whirlwind of thunderous applause. Nathan Brooks, a software developer with a kind appearance, proposed to her when she was 28 years old. With some effort on Margaret's side, the engagement party was organized at the Sentinel Hotel in downtown and was a stunning occasion. Despite my hesitation, I felt obligated to go. I was never really free from the shackles of family. I painstakingly painted the Columbia River Gorge, an area I had long championed in my work for Grace's birthday. It wasn't grandiose, but it was heartfelt and significant. As I passed it to Margaret, she arched an eyebrow. "Could that be an artwork?" "How very remarkable." Grace turned to greet her guests after smiling politely. I hid around the room's edge and held onto my glass as the old pain started to set in. However, I also started to get the impression that this evening will change everything. As the light from the chandeliers danced across the ivory silk-draped tables in the Sentinel Hotel ballroom, the room sparkled like a gem. As the room resounded with laughter and the clinking of glasses, I stood at the bar, my fingertips caressing the rim of a glass of sparkling water. People were staring in awe at Grace as she elegantly moved through the crowd, her cream dress reflecting the light. Her fiancé Nathan hung around nearby, his humble smile, lending an air of modesty to the lavish scene. When I watched them, a mix of emotions, joy, and sadness rose within me. Everything was exquisite and treasured in Grace's world. Even though mine was quieter, it was built on the foundation of the forest that I fought to protect, and I was at her side this evening. I could no longer support myself financially outside of my work at the PNWR. An effort to stop a developer's bulldozers from destroying old-growth forest under Mount Hood's shadow was spearheaded by me just last month. I worked through the nights and into the mornings, poring over data, making proposals, and addressing a skeptical city council. When our group was awarded a $2 million grant to safeguard the property, we were overjoyed. It served as my signature and my way of making an impact. As a means of attracting Margaret's attention, I sent her an image of the forest. A single line: Grace's engagement party is this Saturday. That was her response. Being prompt is crucial. Thomas remained silent throughout. I looked at my phone nevertheless, even though the familiar ache was coming back. The object I had built remained unmoved by their silence. As photographers followed Grace around the party, guests marveled at her modeling portfolio, and Grace herself became the party's center of attraction. My customary green outfit served as my only allusion to the occasion, allowing me to blend in. After Nathan saw me looking and waving, he broke away from Grace and walked up to me. He complimented Emily's painting and said it was beautiful in a soothing voice. "That wood is very important to you, isn't it?" I nodded in response to his surprising attention. The confession came from my heart. As he smiled, a genuine expression appeared in his eyes. "I wish Grace had your drive." As his comments lingered unanticipated, I felt briefly noticed. He was startled to hear Margaret's voice as she implored him to go back to Grace's side. I dove into a corner and observed as the room centered around Grace. While daydreaming, I imagined the garden at my Laurelhurst cottage, which was teeming with ferns and wildflowers. Years of missed vacations and extra hours paid for the house. It served as a refuge. By the time I was 32 years old, I had managed to pull off the seemingly impossible. I had built a life for myself apart from the validation of my parents. Their indifference weighed heavily on me as I stood here. For what reason did I keep hoping for their honor? The unsolved mystery kept running through my mind. Margaret burst onto the scene, her aroma strong and her smile wide. "We need to talk, my sweet Emily." Thomas, with his judge-like hands crossed and an unbreakable expression on his face, stood behind her. Despite the knot in my gut, I trailed behind them to a tranquil corner where the music had faded to a faint hum. The air was charged with an electric energy that no one could quite put their finger on. Margaret leaned in and spoke in a subtle yet striking way. "The engagement of Grace is a momentous occasion, Emily. Its perfection is our aim." Nodding nervously, I proceeded, "No problem at all." "Wow, I'm confused." While clearing his throat, Thomas met cold eyes. "Your Laurelhurst estate. No one person can manage it. For Grace and Nathan to start a life together, they need a proper residence." What came out of the mouth was like a smack. I blinked in a moment of terror. "Do you want me to simply give them my house?" A tight jawline curled up in Margaret's jaw. "I think it's the right thing to do, Emily. What a family gives up for its members. This is due to Grace." My hands clenched into fists as my nails dug into my palms. That house was there for every sleepless night, every dream I awoke from, and every moment I proved to myself that I was sufficient. I politely declined speaking in a calm but quiet tone. That home gave me a job. I own this. With a clenched jaw and a low growl, Thomas dropped his voice. You do not have empathy, Emily. From the beginning, I have been. Grace is a symbol of the promising future for the family. Absolutely not. My chest was filled with anger, and my heart was pounding. A more resolute, I refuse to leave my home, came out of me. Not for Grace or anyone else, for sure. Margaret suddenly lost her sweetness, and her wide eyes betrayed her shock. She snarled at the young woman. Would you genuinely wish to dampen Grace's joy following all that we've been through? I retreated in disapproval. My debt is not for you to decide. As their fury descended upon me, the nook contracted. The increasing tension is noticed by onlookers who glance sideways. Nathan was laughing carelessly with Grace across the room. Thomas firmly held onto my arm as I turned to leave. He hissed at Emily, telling her to do it. If you don't, you might come to regret it. I yanked myself free and retreated to the ballroom where the glaring lights and deafening music had driven me mad. I failed to foresee the impending gloomy storm. I took a drink to steady myself, but Margaret's whisper lingered on in my mind like a ghost. What a family gives up for its members? Invisible years whirled into a razor's edge as her words echoed. My house was at stake, but so was the reputation of the girl who had been told she would never amount to anything. On top of that, it is mine to keep. This evening, absolutely not. Not at any time going forward. I felt my heart racing despite the cacophony of laughter and champagne flutes filling the ballroom. As I stood on the edge of the Sentinel Hotel's grand hall, my verdant dress shimmering in the sunlight, my thoughts kept going back to Thomas's threat. You will later feel regret for it. I spun around in my chair, his poisonous words engulfing me. Margaret glanced over at me from across the room and forced a smile as Grace, dressed in her cream dress, danced happily in Nathan's embrace. The atmosphere was thick with expectation, as if a storm were on the horizon. I held my glass firmly because of its cold edge, which helped to ground me. I refused to accept their love as a prerequisite for my success, and my Laurelhurst home was a statement about my independence. I couldn't believe it. Here they were demanding that I give up my years of selflessness as if it had been for nothing. I took a deep breath, trying to shut them out. Greetings, Emily. Tonight is Grace's night. Nonetheless, the unease remained. The second Margaret and I locked eyes, I knew this wasn't going away. Hers were icy and menacing. Grace and Nathan were accompanied by muted music and illuminated by a spotlight as they approached the dance floor. As the audience applauded and snapped photos, phones went off. As I clenched my jaw and grinned to blend in with the crowd, Margaret appeared by my side, her fingers delicately caressing my elbow. She warned Emily that more was to come, using a lethal blend of sword and silk. Follow in my wake. Thomas was already heading toward a side entrance, his massive shoulders tense with determination. The weight of their expectations made me go along with it, even though I was sick to my stomach. As the noise level of the party dropped, we stealthily entered a hallway with low lighting. I could feel my nervous face reflected in the ornate mirrors that lined the walls. With an unblinking stare, Thomas turned around. Emily, we have provided you with everything, he whispered with an air of menace. As a form of revenge, you're hoarding that house, while Grace is occupied with establishing her future. Margaret nodded while clenching her jaw. It would be appropriate to propose the house as an engagement gift. It's easy as pie. Every family does it. My chest tightened with rage, and I struggled to catch my breath. "That house is mine," I declared, raising the volume of my voice. It was handcrafted nights were spent working and dreams were skipped. Because your love for Grace is greater, you will not let her take it. Margaret put her palm up to her chest in a gasp. "Why do you think it's okay to treat us that way?" "There has been no change in your egotism, Emily. Every time." As he moved forward, Thomas felt his shadow following. "If you refuse to give up that house, I will make sure you understand how important family is." I retreated a step and shook my head. "No, I am tired of always following in your footsteps." With my heart rate increasing to the point where I was ready to bolt, Thomas snatched a crystal vase from a nearby table. As the flowers fell to the floor, his feet trampled on their delicate petals. "Dude, you're so rude." With a tremendous yell, he hurled the vase in the space of a second. Shrapnel flew across the hall as it crashed into my shoulder. I felt a sharp, excruciating agony as blood seeped into my clothing and spilled onto the marble floor. I drew my arm tightly and stumbled as my vision became fuzzy. A clamor that reached the heavens came from the ballroom. As the chaos unfolded, people poured into the corridor, their phones recording every moment. With an angry look on her face, Margaret lunged forward. "You wrecked it entirely." "I spittled," she replied. "By making it about you, you destroyed Grace's special evening." My fingers were tingling from the heat of my blood as I faltered in this dizzying world. Through the throng, Nathan pushed his way, his pale face revealing his terror. "Good day, Emily." He came crashing down to his knees and screamed at me. "Stay close to me." He gave Margaret a cold look. "I am utterly confused about your condition." Thomas felt his wrath turn to amazement as he stood there, his hand still clenched on the stem of the vase. Grace materialized, her clothes shimmering in the dim light. Her face contorted with a look of sheer wonder. "Would you believe my mom? Hello, Dad. I mean, really. What were you doing?" As her voice broke, her perfect exterior showed a crack. As a steady stream of pain shot through my body, I whispered, "They wanted my house, for you," and stared at her. Grace reached instinctively for her mouth as angry tears streamed down her face. I must admit, Emily, I was completely unaware, but her words sounded empty due to the years she remained silent. My best friend and lawyer, Lila Carter, pushed herself forward, even though her phone was ringing. She spoke with conviction as she stated her intention to call the police. "All activity has ceased." A napkin was placed on my cut as she crouched down beside me. "Rest assured, Em. Remain by my side." There were a lot of guests who whispered, some out of disgust and some because they were filming. Nathan sprang up to shield me from Margaret's intense gaze. "This ends now," he said, his normally calm demeanor abruptly replaced by icy hostility. "Never again will you touch her." A flurry of red and blue lights flashed, and the distant sound of sirens pierced the air. As the glass doors of the hotel swung open, nearby paramedics moved me delicately to a stretcher with their gentle touches. The actual pain was within my heart, not on my blood-stained garment or my aching shoulder. The brutality of Thomas, the poison of Margaret and Grace's tears mirrored my entire life, every moment that I had been overlooked. As the medics assisted me in getting to my feet, I met Grace's eyes. "Excuse me, but I looked away," she whispered. I felt my sincere apologies weren't enough. Certainly not right now. With the crowd's roar dying down to a low growl, the light in the auditorium began to fade. For an instant, Nathan's palm brushed against mine as he followed close behind the stretcher. According to him, you're stronger than they think. Despite everything going on around me, I clung to his words. As the ambulance doors closed, I felt a shift happening inside of me, despite the fact that treachery had spoiled the night's celebration of love. Not just any old party was winding down. My fight for justice, self-determination, and the life I had constructed reached a tipping point at that moment. As the ambulance sped through the rain-slicked streets of Portland, the sound of its siren reverberated with the agony in my chest. As the paramedics bandaged my shoulder, I couldn't help but think about Thomas's wrathful temper and the gash in the crystal vase. The real wound, marked by years of being treated as second class by my parents, lay underneath the blood that coated my clothes. I laid on the stretcher, staring at the ceiling, while Nathan made his resonant remarks. Your strength is completely unknown to them. As the city lights went out, the weight of betrayal crushed me, no matter how much I wanted to trust him. The bright buzz and sterile air within the hospital gave me a sense of stability. When the nurses were tending to my wound, their voices were gentle but urgent. Concussion risk, they murmured in unison. Thank goodness there are no pauses. I felt the bandages squeezing my shoulder and the pressure on my skin. As the painkillers took effect, my mind raced back to the events that had transpired in the hallway, such as Thomas's snarl, Margaret's poison, and Grace's tear-stained visage. So how did we get here? The people I cared about most, the ones I had wished would adore me, had crushed me in front of a crowd. Amid all that suffering, I had a revelation I owed them nothing more than to tell them the truth. Nathan was by my side the whole time, unwavering. His rumpled suit betrayed his anxiety as he sank on the plastic chair. He spoke softly to Emily, telling her she was not a burden to herself. Gathering witnesses is something Lila has already started doing. We will deal a blow to them. My throat tightened as I nodded. While the police were apprehending Thomas and Margaret, my mighty friend and lawyer, Lila Carter, was occupied with recording the scene at the hotel and taking statements. I felt Nathan's hand on mine, which helped me to stay composed, as I faced the horrifying thought of appearing in court beside my parents. It was finally me, not a ghost. The engagement celebration had descended into anarchy at the Sentinel. Gastrons departed en masse, their mutterings incisive with indignation. Angry and confrontational Nathan's parents, the Brookses, stood before Grace. With her arms crossed, Mrs. Brooks revealed that they had faith in your family. But this bloodshed and brutality, it cannot be forgotten. We will not associate this with our son, crumbling into a chair. Grace sobbed as the magical night faded away, still dressed in her cream dress. Nathan gave little solace. Disappointment hardened his once soft eyes toward her. While being at my side, he had observed the truth of her family, my family. The following morning, Lila brought her laptop to the hospital, which was filled to the brim with evidence. "We've got multiple videos, Em," she exclaimed with a fierce determination. "Thomas hurling the vase and Margaret yelling at you are both shown clearly in the footage. Further, 10 witnesses, one of whom is Nathan, are prepared to give testimony. This goes beyond physical aggression and encompasses psychological manipulation as well. Charges have been filed." As it all hit me, I couldn't help but fix my gaze on her. I felt like I was cutting a cord when I sued my parents, but that cord had been a shackle for years. I told them to do it in a forceful voice. I demand fairness. Quick action was taken in this circumstance. After a week, I was cleared to go home with a still stiff but improving shoulder. In the midst of the mayhem, we were untangling Lila's office in downtown Portland, served as our command center, its wood bookshelves loaded with legal tomes, providing as a dramatic contrast a hefty dossier including affidavits, medical records, and those damning recordings was placed across her desk. According to her, your case is absolutely solid. I knew I wasn't in this battle alone with Nathan sitting next to me. I steadied my fingers as I signed the paperwork. Nobody was left out of this. It was for the young woman who had heard again and over that she was inadequate. Witnesses at the trial in Multnomah County Courthouse included reporters, interested citizens, and even distant relatives who had heard rumors about the scandal. With pale cheeks and flashing eyes, Thomas and Margaret sat at the defendant's table. Telling my narrative, I stood up there with my pulse pumping. The years of disregard, the partiality that elevated Grace while I declined, and the fateful night when they forcibly entered my home in response to my denial. The movies were played by Lila, and the footage was really horrifying. It showed Thomas's arm flailing, the vase breaking, and my blood pooling. You ruined everything, according to Margaret's cries. In the otherwise quiet courtroom resounded. Then came the eyewitnesses. With a steady but angry voice, Nathan described the hallway. He testified that he had witnessed Thomas assault her. Margaret encouraged him. Recounts told by visitors who had witnessed decades of partiality painted a picture of a family in which one daughter was the star and the other was erased as Lila invited them to her home. As Thomas's counsel phrased it, it was a father's intense wrath that prompted him to act in such a way. However, the videos were truthful. The ruling was quick, and the jury's expressions were glum. According to the foreman, Thomas Harper and Margaret Harper are found guilty of attacking, emotionally abusing, and attempting to coerce. Everyone in the room let out a gasp. A frown creased Margaret's face as she clenched the table, as if he could force the facts to disappear. Thomas focused his eyes forward with tightened jaw. The sentence was handed down by Judge Larson, a woman whose hair was a steely gray. Punishment: 7 years in state prison with a 5-year parole ban. Obtaining complete recompense for all expenditures linked to medical treatment, legal counsel, and emotional suffering. A thunderclap sounded by the gavel sealed their doom. For the first time in years, I let out a breath. Justice didn't make the hurt go away, but it was a relief to finally have it lifted off my shoulders. I felt a sense of closure rather than joy as the bailiffs escorted Thomas and Margaret away, their handcuffs shimmering. Grace was the center of their universe, while I was reduced to a mere bystander. I was the only one left standing as that entire world crumbled around me. After the courts had adjourned, Grace approached me, her eyes crimson. "Shh, Emily, I'm so sorry. It was worse than I realized. I should have raised my voice." As her voice faltered, I realized that she was more than just the golden kid. She was also a character ensnared in their narrative. "Grace, I insist in a low but firm voice that I do not hate you. I must prioritize living my life at this moment." Tears streaming down her face, she nodded and then strode away, her figure disappearing into the downpour. From a distance, I wished her luck because she was going to depart Portland and forge her own way. While I was waiting, Nathan smiled as if to whisper a promise. With a look of pride on his face, he told you you did it. Stand up for who you are. With the icy courthouse stairs underneath us, I leaned toward him. This was different. I wasn't only surviving anymore. Suddenly, I had complete freedom. Although the wounds on my shoulder and in my heart would eventually heal, they would forever serve as a reminder of the day I stood up for myself and the world acknowledged my choice. A gentle grayness pervaded the sky over Portland, portending rebirth following a storm. Within Forest Park, I found myself surrounded by majestic firs that reached for the sky, their hushed voices mingling with the sound of leaves rustling in the wind. I could still feel the slight ache in my shoulder from the vase's impact, but the more serious injuries, those caused by years of neglect, were finally starting to mend. With his gentle touch and unassuming power, Nathan stood by my side, guiding me towards a future I had never dared to dream of. The garden of my Laurelhurst home was now brimming with wildflowers, and each blossom stood as a tribute to the things I had produced. It was ready to receive us. This life was mine alone, and it had been hard-won. A new cadence had taken its place in the months following the trial, and the reverberations of that fateful evening at the Sentinel Hotel had gradually diminished. I returned to my employment at the Pacific Northwest Research Institute, with newfound zeal, my heart more committed to environmental conservation than before. The forest that I had battled to preserve near Mount Hood is now a protected sanctuary. Hikers can enjoy its trails without ever having to think about the conflicts I had fought to end. As I drew plant life in my notebook, I felt a sense of calm and accomplishment with each stroke. Thomas and Margaret. My parents had faded into obscurity, their prison sentences barely audible. Neither did I visit or write. Their departure allowed me to breathe easier, which was a blessing. Grace departed from Portland in pursuit of a new beginning in Seattle. At one point, she wrote me a letter. The words were nervous but genuine. Emily, my identity is expanding beyond that of their daughter. I wish you joy. I put it aside, pleased that she was making an effort, but unprepared to respond. I had long ago outgrown the chapter that her departure closed. I had moved past the anguish of her privileged position in our family. Not the ethereal sister, but a lady who had carved out her own road to greatness. I was Emily Harper. Because of Nathan's generosity, I was able to rely on him as an anchor and a guiding current. As night fell, he took me on a hike through the pine-scented Mount Hood forest. Gleaming in his hand was a wooden ring carved with a delicate fern leaf, and he knelt under its canopy of stars. I don't want a perfect life, he declared to Emily Harper, his voice thick with emotion. With you I seek a true one. Will we tie the knot? My eyesight was obscured by tears as delight rushed like a tsunami. As I raised him up, I couldn't help but chuckle, and our hug reinforced our commitment. Simple, rooted, and authentic, the ring was like an extension of who I am. My maid of honor, Lila Carter, added a blazing grin to our tiny ceremony, which took place in the wildflower meadow of Forest Park. No bright lights, no spectators, just people who saw me for who I truly was. My hair was pulled loosely back, and I donned a sage-colored flowing dress, embellished with a lilac-woven crown of daisies. The vows that Nathan made were passionate yet hushed. Anywhere we go, Emily, you are my home. I pledged to cherish him and establish a life for us where we could prosper. I knew I wasn't merely existing when our kisses carried our laughter on the breeze. My life was resurrected. The Laurelhurst bungalow became our home when we relocated there. Lupines, columbines, and ferns are all signs of resilience, so I planted a garden full of them. As the sun went down, we would sit on the porch and dream of an endless future to help kids who are unsupported by their families. I started a nonprofit called Green Haven. We provide scholarships for science programs for myself and everyone else who was told they weren't enough. I fought, and every letter from an appreciative adolescent brought it all back to me. In retrospect, I can see how the lessons I learned changed my life, and how I now use those skills to inspire others. You are valuable regardless of whether other people think so or not. True worth is intrinsic, but I wasted a lot of time trying to live up to my parents' expectations. Feeling inferior is common in America, a country where success is paramount. Dreams, labor, and heart alone are adequate. Secondly, it is essential to stand up against injustice, even if it is never easy. Although it was a major step forward, suing my parents was like stepping over a taboo. Seek out friends, attorneys, or therapists as allies as you can, while you battle for your freedom from a toxic family. 3. Love. Genuine love is a healer. Family isn't defined by blood, but by the people who stick by you through thick and thin, as Nathan and Lila taught me. Raise yourself up by forming a powerful tribe. Listen up, life ain't fair, but the way it turns out is entirely up to you. Gather a few pennies, follow your heart, and speak your truth as a first step. Despite shaky hands, I tended to my garden, and today it's growing. Take care of yours as well. Emily Harper here, and the scars on my body speak volumes not of suffering, but of resilience and steadfastness in the face of adversity. Everything here, this home, this life, this love, is mine. Also own whatever it is that you're creating. Keep going. Everyone is eagerly anticipating your blossoming.